Well, hello everybody, and thank you for joining me again on another one of our level 3 anatomy and physiology talks. You're doing very well. If you've watched all the previous videos and you've got to this stage, there are not that many more to do. This is quite a big topic. It's the nervous system. And because it's such a big topic, I've actually divided it up into the nervous system, but also muscle contraction. So if you have a look, you should be able to find a PowerPoint and a video like this and a quiz that's purely about muscle contraction. Of course, there's a lot of crossover in both, but it just seemed a lot to put into one video. So this is looking more at simply the nervous system. Okay, let's buckle ourselves in and get going. So by the end of this session, you should be able to describe all the roles and functions of the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, including both the somatic and autonomic systems. 5.2 I've put in italics because that's to do with muscle contraction. So that will be the learning outcomes for the other video. You'll also be looking today at the structure and function of proprioceptors to be able to describe how exercise can enhance our neuromuscular connections and improve our motor fitness. And I hope you remember the different aspects of motor fitness from level 2. And also we'll be looking at plyometric exercise and how it uses the stretch shortening cycle. So let's get going. So the nervous system. Now, the nervous system and the endocrine system are both the ways in which the body sends messages, but the nervous system is our fast acting part. And this sends electrical messages, which usually take less than 1 second to reach their destination in the body. So its role is to monitor both the internal and external environments in the body, and the messages that is received from various receptors that we have around our body come into the nervous system, and they then need to be interpreted, and then the appropriate motor response can be made. The nervous system also makes adjustments to the physiological settings of our body because those need to stay within an almost constant state. And this is known as homeostasis, which means same state. And it just means keeping a lot of our body systems within very small limits so they're able to function effectively. And good examples of these are blood sugar, our fluid, water levels, and temperature. So the main elements of the nervous system function are threefold, really. So first of all, we've got our sensory part, our sensory input, and here we've got nerves and proprioceptors and receptor organs that sense changes both inside and outside the body. Messages then get sent to our central nervous system where interpretation happens, where the messages are analysed and interpreted and the body decides what to do about it. And then finally, our motor output is where our nervous system responds to the incoming data by sending out messages for the body to do a variety of actions to bring things back into the normal. Okay, so we're just going to take a brief look as a reminder from level 2 anatomy and physiology. You hopefully will have done that we have the central nervous system, and that leads and connects to our peripheral nervous system, and our peripheral nervous system is divided up into our somatic, which is to do with our voluntary external, and our autonomic systems, which is our involuntary internal. And we'll be looking at each one of these in one at a time now. So our central nervous system. So this is our brain and spinal cord. And I've got a little picture on the next. There we go. So the brain, and we can see how it's deeply grooved. And then we've got the spinal cord, which connects to the base of our brain. And then all the nerves in blue are our peripheral. So we're just thinking about our central. We'll go back to have a look at that now. So our brain and our spinal cord, so we get messages coming to our brain and spinal cord from our peripheral nervous system. And this is really an interpretation center. So this is where all the interpretation of messages and then the sending out of the correct motor response occurs. So the brain is responsible for interpreting messages, and the spine is more of a relay center. So that transfers messages in and out of the central nervous system. And also, some decisions are made as you were at a spinal reflex level, which doesn't actually go to the brain, it just occurs at spinal level. But most of the motor responses need to come in for interpretation. So that's the image we shared, and you can, just to remind us which parts of the nervous system are which. Okay, so let's have a little at our peripheral nervous system. So in total, this is our 31 pairs of spinal nerves that leave our spinal cord. And we've got two main kinds of nerves. We've got afferent and we've got efferent. So our afferent nerves are any nerves that are coming in from the outside or from the both outside and inside our body towards the central nervous system. So those are our afferent nerves, which are sensory. They're carrying messages about sensation. Sensory neurons carry information about change. It's then processed in our central nervous system, and our efferent, E for exit, efferent nerves carry information away from our central nervous system to enact an appropriate response. So that's our peripheral nervous system, and that's sort of seen in the blue. All the blue lines are part of our peripheral. So I mentioned there about the afferent and efferent, and here's just an image. And if you can think of an acronym ACE, A for afferent, C for your CNS interpretation, and then E for efferent, so incoming interpretation and outgoing. That can help you to remember which one is which, that ACE idea. So we said that the peripheral nervous system was divided into the somatic and the autonomic. So the somatic part of the peripheral nervous system is to do with looking at changes in our external environment. So the somatic part is going to receive messages about movement, and we'll be looking at some of the proprioceptors that provide information about movement shortly. And also from our skin, we have a variety of receptors that include ones that give us information about touch, pain, and skin temperature. So this part of our nervous system is more under our conscious control, and it allows us to voluntarily control, move our skeletal muscles. So this is external and under our conscious control. That's our somatic nervous system branch. The other one is our autonomic nervous system branch, and this part is concerned with changes that happen internally. So this is a lot more to do with hormonal status within our body, how our organs, our heart, and those the smooth muscles, those involuntary muscles that we have. So this is linked to the endocrine system, which we'll be looking at in future sessions. And the endocrine system is a slower messenger system that works using hormones rather than electrical messages. Now, the difference between the autonomic and the somatic nervous system is that the autonomic part is not under our conscious control, so we have no control over that. But the nerves, the efferent, the outgoing nerves from our autonomic nervous system are divided again into sympathetic and parasympathetic systems, and that's what we're going to have a little look at now. So again, we've got a diagram here that shows some of the things we've already looked at, how our nervous system is divided into central and peripheral. And if we look towards a peripheral side, that then subdivides into our somatic voluntary control of skeletal, our autonomic, involuntary control of our glands and smooth muscle. And then that autonomic part divides again into our sympathetic, our parasympathetic, and perhaps the easiest and shortest way to think about it, sympathetic, fight or flight, and parasympathetic, rest and digest. And one helpful way that I've been told to tell the difference between the two, if you think of para, it's like parachute, and a parachute slows you down. So when you hear parasympathetic, you know that's a slowing down, that's the rest and digest, and the sympathetic will be the other one, which is our fight and flight. So this sympathetic system, so everything to do with the sympathetic speeds things up. So this is where we're having times of stress. During times of stress, such as exercise, this is when the sympathetic nervous system will kick in, and we're going to get blood diverted from our sort of digestive system and our core. We'll get it diverted out towards our periphery, towards our muscles. So we're going to be having an increased heart rate to provide the oxygen we need if we're going to go into flight mode. Increased breathing rate, again increasing the oxygen. The heart's going to pump harder, so we've got a higher stroke volume, more blood is circulating around our muscles. We've got vasoconstriction of the arteries and arterioles to increase our blood pressure. And the neurotransmitters are adrenaline and noradrenaline. And these are the chemicals that are transferred between one nerve ending and the receptors of another nerve. And we'll be looking at this later. But that's quite an important part, remembering that adrenaline, if you think about when you're nervous, you have a lot of adrenaline. So that's the neurotransmitter that we need to remember for our sympathetic system. Now the opposite one, our parachuting, slowing down, our parasympathetic nerves. So these are responsible for times of rest when our body, we want to calm it down, at night time, decreasing activity, that rest and digest where the blood's going to be more towards our digestive system. We don't need it so much in our muscles. So everything is just the opposite of our sympathetic system. So if I go back to that, for the parasympathetic, we're going to have a reduced heart rate, reduced breathing rate, reduced blood pressure. So it's just completely the opposite. And the neurotransmitter that's used in our parasympathetic system is acetylcholine. So our nerve endings contain both these different kinds of neurotransmitters. It just depends on the need of our body at that particular time, which one is released. So it's kind of a balancing act. We've got our sympathetic and our parasympathetic nervous systems sort of working in tandem with each other to maintain this level of homeostasis, this same state, to keep our internal environment as steady as possible so that all our systems can work effectively. So here I've just included some pictures to show you how this idea of the control center and feedback loop works. So for example, if it's too hot, we get messages into our central nervous system saying it's too hot and gives us messages about how we should need to cool down. And likewise, so it's telling us here, looks like an Egyptian, telling us here to go and stand in front of a fan. And we've got that effector that's causing us to sweat. So the messages help us to cool down because our body sweats, which brings our temperature down. And then on the other side, on the right-hand side of the picture, we're getting messages to say where our body is too cold, sends messages to the muscles, which then shiver as a response, which increases our body temperature. So that's a little example of how temperature is controlled in our body to maintain homeostasis. So we're going to jump to another thing now. We definitely did this at level 2. I hope you can recall this looks fairly familiar. And this is the structure of a neuron. And a neuron is another word for a nerve cell. So this is what some of our nerve cells look like. They're very varied, actually, nerve cells, but this is kind of like your standard idea of a nerve cell. So let's have a little look. So we've got at the top of the nerve cell, we've got our cell body. That's the kind of round thing. And in our cell body, we've got the control center, which is our nucleus. And then those little arm things that are wriggling out of it are called dendrites. And these are the things that are the receptors that receive information about the state of the environment around them. So these like collect all the information, bring it into the cell body, which then processes it, and then the nerve impulse as a result moves along the axon. Now that's a long bit that looks like it's got a string of sausages attached to it, and those sausages are what's called myelin sheaths. These are fatty sheaths that surround the axon of a nerve and helps to increase the speed of the nerve impulses, because what happens, the electrical message jumps between each one of those little sheaths, and it makes it a much faster response. And then at the end, we've got our axon terminal. So this is where the message ends. And right at the very bottom, you can see what's called the synapse. Now, in that little triangular dome bit there, that's where we've got all our different neurotransmitters. And this might then synapse with other dendrites, or in the image on the left, it's going into a muscle. So it will be the neuromuscular junction there. So that's our basic structure. And I think we're going to be having a look at it again now. So here we go. So I've added another diagram in here because I like having lots of diagrams for you to have a look at while I'm talking. So again, the dendrites receive and carry information about action potentials. The axon transmits the action potential. Our nucleus is the cell's control center. Our myelin sheath is that insulating body that allows the messages to travel faster. The terminals, the axon terminals, is where you have that interface between the neuron and another kind of cell that can vary. And our synaptic end bulbs is those neurotransmitters. And I hope you can remember that for the sympathetic system, we've got our adrenaline and our noradrenaline, and for our parasympathetic, we've got our acetylcholine. Had to think there for a minute. So here's a little bit of a closer image about our synapses. Now here again is the axon terminal that we were looking at in some of the previous images, but just blown up larger. So you can see now that there's a gap between the end of one nerve and the postsynaptic site, whatever that might be, of another cell. So the electrical message can't jump across that gap as an electrical message. The way it gets passed across that gap is in a chemical form. So I want you to almost imagine a little messenger sitting in a boat that rows between the end of one nerve ending and the beginning of another. And that's how it gets across the gap. It travels in a different form, in this chemical form. And you can see these little what's called vesicles, little sort of bubbles that are in the axon terminal. And here is where our neurotransmitters are stored and then released as needed. So I wouldn't worry too much about some of the terminology here, but the space in the middle is called a synapse. So the area before is going to be presynaptic, and the other bit is your postsynapse. So the synapse is the space, the presynaptic end is the yellow, the postsynaptic end is the receptor site. So now we've talked about the nervous system as being the body's fast electrical messaging system. So let's have a little look about how our nerve impulses actually travel. So when our nerves are at rest, there's what's called an action potential. So we've got a difference in charge on one side of our our neuron membrane of our neuron to the other. And this is called the action potential, this difference in charge. So one side is more positively charged than the other. Now, when an electrical impulse travels down, the membrane actually what's called as depolarizes, so that action potential changes and the membrane becomes permeable to sodium ions, and they rush in, and this changes the action potential. It sort of switches it round, and when a certain threshold is reached, the impulse will travel down the neuron. To be able to understand this, we have to look at something called the sodium potassium ions, the sodium potassium pump, which is the movement of sodium potassium ions across that membrane that allows this depolarization and repolarization to occur. So, deep breath, let's dive in and see what we've got here. So, our sodium potassium pump, this is what's responsible for maintaining the correct electrical charge within a cell. This is constantly working to ensure that the status of the neuron is such that it's ready to receive an electrical impulse and then resets it after that's been received. So this sodium potassium pump works both in muscle and in nerve cells. So it's an important one to remember because we need to think of it for lots of the functions we think about, both for sports massage, for personal training, gym instructor, all of these things. So during that time of nerve transmission and or muscle contraction, you've got the sodium ions are being pumped out of the cell and potassium is being pumped into the cell, but they're not in equal ratios. It's at a ratio of 2 to 3. And it's because there's this difference in ratio that you get a change in the electrical charge that results in either nervous impulse or a muscle contraction. Now you can go and have a look at this video if you want. I won't go into it now, but you can click on that if you go into, I don't know if you can do it from here. I think if you go into the PowerPoint, you'll be able to link from there, and that helps to explain it. It's got an actual action video of the sodium potassium pump working. I've just got a picture of it. So if you can see, we start with 3 sodiums from the inside of the cell going out and only 2 potassiums coming back in. Now this process, so that the yellow heads with the wiggly tails, that's our cell membrane, and the kind of purple U-shaped thing is our pump, our sodium potassium pump. That will be a protein, and it works as a pump. It pumps sodium out, pumps potassium back in, and to be able to do that, it needs ATP. Okay, so this again connects into the other topics of energy systems as well. So 3 go out with the ATP. That the ATP allows the shape of that transport protein to change and to release the sodium on the outside and to allow the potassium to come back in. So just remember that movement of sodium potassium across the cell membrane in that uneven 3 to 2 ratio. That it's an active transport because they're going against the concentration gradient, so it needs ATP to function. Right, I hope you got that. Do watch a video, it can be quite helpful for that. So the sensory organs. Now we've said that along the afferent nerves that go towards the central nervous system, they carry information about changes in our internal and external environment. But the things that actually pick up those changes are called our various sensory organs, and we've got lots of different ones. So for the internal environment, this is what's operating through our autonomic nervous system. We've got sensors that include our chemoreceptors. So they're going to detect any chemical change. And an example of this is carbon dioxide levels. So carbon dioxide and also calcium levels, because we need to ensure that carbon dioxide levels don't get too high, and also that we have adequate calcium for our muscle contraction. If you remember, we need calcium to help with our binding of our actin and myosin onto receptor sites. So those are chemoreceptors. Thermo is what it sounds like, something to do with temperature. So we've got thermoreceptors actually in all our tissues, and they detect temperature changes. And if you remember, I had that image earlier where the body can respond to fluctuations in temperature by either causing sweating or by causing shivering. And those are responses that help us get back into that sort of steady state to keep our homeostatic ranges correct. Then we've got baroreceptors. Now, these are to do with changes in blood pressure. So we find these in the walls of our arteries, and these are looking at these detect changes within our blood pressure. And then finally, we've got proprioceptors. And our proprioceptors are in our muscles and our tendons, and they detect changes within our body position. So actually, and it's proprioceptors that we're going to look at specifically because they're most relevant to the topics that we're looking at. So proprioceptors are providing information about the position of our body in space and about our joints as well. So they're going to be sending information back along the afferent nerves, providing feedback on things like the position of our body, on pressure, on tension, on lengthening, and the speed with which our muscles are lengthening. And the two types of proprioceptors that you need to know about specifically are our muscle spindles and our Golgi tendon organs. Sometimes you'll see those written just as GTO. So muscle spindles, Golgi tendon organs. So let's have a little look at those and see what we can learn from them. So muscle spindles first, and these are found within the muscle, located actually in the muscle, kind of wrapped around the muscle fibers themselves. And these detect changes in length. So muscle spindles detect changes in length. And what happens when they detect a change in muscle length is they bring about a reflexive contraction of skeletal muscle. So I said at the beginning how some of our nervous system responses occur at spinal level, and this is an example of one of those reflexive spinal level contractions that happen to prevent injury. And this is part of our stretch reflex. And you might know it when you do like one of those taps under the knee, that you're doing sort of a reflex tap. You'll see a reflex knee jerk as a result of tapping the patellar tendon. And again, that's a spinal level response to the skeletal muscle being lengthened. So I think you can see in the diagram at the bottom, so you have that stretch in the muscle, you get afferent signals being sent to the spinal cord, and there's just this relay system within the spinal cord where you have interneurons, connects both the afferent and the efferent fibers, so interneurons within the spinal cord, and then you get that afferent response of the skeletal muscle contracting in order to prevent damage. So that's our stretch reflex. So a little bit more detail now about what muscle spindle structures actually look like. So these are small sensory organs and they're quite elongated. So what you get is you get several muscle fibers that are contained within the sheath, and they're called intrafusal fibers. And you can see the difference between when they're stretched, as in the picture on the left, when they're getting, and there's lots of firing. The lines underneath give an idea of how many messages would be sent along the afferent nerves as a result of being stretched. Lots and lots of messages, lots of firing happening. At relaxed, just a bit of firing, and when they're contracted, no firing happening. So those are your intrafusal fibers, your extrafusal fibers, and the sensory fibers within a capsule that's part of your muscle fibers. So those are your muscle spindles that you find located within the muscles, that are fired when the muscles are excessively lengthened. again, here's just another image, just a larger image of the muscle stretch reflex that we've already gone through, but worth spending time looking at. You can actually see the muscle fibers, the spindle fibers on the image where those muscle fiber spindles are stretched, activation of the neuron, processing, and then we get the firing of the muscles and the contraction happening. So the next one is our Golgi tendon organs. So if you remember, our muscle spindles detect length, our Golgi tendon organs detect excessive tension. So they're looking at different things. You can tell by the name of the location, they're located in the tendons of muscles. And we're looking here at excessive tension. And again, what happens, you get reflexive relaxation of skeletal muscle to prevent injury. So it's another reflex action. So it's the opposite of the stretch reflex. Almost when there's too much tension, too much shortening, you just get a reflexive relaxation. And this again is done in order to prevent damage to the muscles. So this picture shows the location of the muscle spindle and the Golgi tendon organs. So the structure. So Golgi tendon organs are made of collagen strands, and they're connected one end to the muscle fibers and the other end to the tendons. And you have a fibrous capsule encloses the whole Golgi tendon organs. And the capsule has got nerves that feed into it so that messages can be sent out along those afferent nerves to the central nerve, to the spinal cord. So let's have a little look now at the effect of exercise on the nervous system. So exercise, the more you repeat a certain action, the stronger the pathways and connections are going to be within your nervous system. So it's part of skill acquisition. So the more you practice something, the more you get better at it because you're creating new connections, strengthening existing ones, and literally creating new connections between neurons within your nervous system. It improves synchronization of motor recruitment in order to get stronger muscle contraction, so that the ways that that synchronized contraction that you get when you want to create a strong contraction improves the more that the muscle is worked, so the more that the nervous system gets used to those patterns of synchronicity, those patterns of firing, improves the pattern of motor recruitment. So the muscles can contract more strongly. Another big plus is that it improves your balance, because we talked about those proprioceptors. So we've got our Golgi tendon organs and our muscle spindle fibers, and those are constantly sending messages back to our central nervous system to correct balance. That's one of our sort of, not exactly homeostasis, but we're constantly needing to make sure that we maintain balance. And the more we practice balance, the more efficiently we're going to get firing and feedback to and from our proprioceptors, so our balance improves. And good balance is absolutely crucial, especially as you get older. And it's one of the indicators of longevity, of how long you live. So really, really important to work with people on their balance if that's appropriate. So it improves our speed. So these are all our motor fitness things, isn't it? It improves our speed because we're getting faster firing of the nervous impulses. We're getting increased frequency and increased strength of the impulses. Improves agility, again, for the same sort of reasons. And it improves our coordination. So if we remember our motor skills are our ABC, PRS. That's how I remember it. So agility, balance, coordination, power, PR, strength, and reaction time. So all of these things are going to be improved as a result of exercise. So one area you want to look at particularly is something called plyometric exercise. And this ties in with the aspects of the nervous system that we've been looking at. So, what exactly is plyometric exercise? Well, it's a type of exercise that uses speed and force in order to build up power in those strong muscles that we've got in our legs and in our glutes. And it's about quick, explosive movements. So you have to understand the basis on which it works. And that's an understanding that if your concentric muscle action is going to be stronger if it immediately follows an eccentric contraction, that's a lengthening contraction. So if you rapidly lengthen and then shorten muscles in fast sequences, you get use of that stretch reflex that we were talking about earlier with the muscle spindles. So there are three elements to plyometric exercise. You have your pre-stretch part, which is that rapid eccentric lengthening, the amortization phase, which is kind of the phase between your eccentric and concentric, and then you've got that powerful muscle contraction, that concentric shortening, such as the power jump or the big throw. And examples of these are going to include squat jumps, box jumps, your burpees, anything that's got sort of a real speed, force, and power in it. So the overall purpose is to enhance our power output in the concentric phase when you're using sort of ballistic exercises, and to increase the overall force that you can generate. Here we go. And this just shows a little picture of those three phases I just talked about: our eccentric, our rapid lengthening, that amortization, that sort of phase in the middle where we're actually losing elastic energy. So we want that phase to be as short as possible. And then that dynamic concentric part where the muscles are shortening and we're getting more power as a result of having that eccentric phase, first of all. So plyometric exercises work by increasing muscle power, but because they're using those muscle spindles which detect change in muscle length, and we're firing that stretch reflex, we're making use of that natural stretch reflex that we have in our muscles to get an even more powerful force. So when we're in the landing phase, the quads have to, so imagine you're doing a big jump, the quads must contract eccentrically to slow the movement. And then this increases the elastic energy in the muscles and tendons as the muscle lengthens. So you've got stored energy within the muscle. And then you get immediate concentric contraction, and all that stored energy is released, increasing the total force that's produced. Whew, there we go. That's it. Great. So we've looked at all those different aspects of the nervous system. We've looked at proprioceptors. We've looked at the Golgi tendon organs and the muscle spindles. We've looked at the effects of exercise on the nervous system. We've looked at plyometric exercise. And it's well worth going back over your level 2 notes. If any of those things you were struggling with a little bit, do go and have a look in your manuals, your level 2 notes. Have a look at some online videos, including the one that I've put in here, and do come and ask any of us any questions. As I say, there's also the muscle contraction part of the nervous system block module. So please go and watch that as well and have a go at the quizzes. But well done for sticking with me, and all the best. Take care. Thank you. Bye bye.